We're talking about FISA this week, which is an issue of national security. And I want to quote Admiral Mullen's comment at a hearing, a defense hearing, where when asked what the biggest threat to national security was, his response was, the biggest threat to national security is our national debt. Jerome Powell, the Fed chairman, who probably is loath to opine on fiscal policy, in a 60 Minutes interview said, the national debt, our fiscal path, is completely unsustainable, and it's an urgent matter that we must address. I think that's significant, and that's some backdrop to the budget baseline update from February. Most recently was in May of '23, and then this recent update here in February. Bottom line is, on Valentine's Day, when we think about how much we love our significant others, one could ask, how much do we love the country? How much do we love our children's future in the country? Well, as Shakespeare said, let me count the ways. Maybe the ways we're not loving our country well. $20 trillion in additional debt over the next 10 years, from 34 trillion, record high, to 54 trillion. Clearly, the mandatory spending is driving this. Demographics, but also inflation. Inflation is significant. We'll dig into that. That's because of the COLAs, the cost of living adjustments. In these entitlement programs, we're spending a lot more money. Not to mention the 10,000 baby boomers retiring a day. That adds to this unsustainable fiscal path. Interest cost. Interest rates are recently in record highs, and the interest expense on the debt is exploding. In fact, the revision from May to February, in just months, was $125 billion in additional cost to service the debt. That's more than the Homeland Security Department. That's more than the budget of commerce and education. The debt, or the interest on the debt rather, is now higher than we spend on all of national defense, if the $870 billion projections come true. Some project it'll be upwards of $1 trillion. Of the $20 trillion in additional debt, because of the current policies and programs of the federal government, we're going to see over 60% of all of that cost in interest alone. Not anything to address the solvency of our senior safety nets, not anything to help ensure our soldiers and sailors are safe and successful in the most important job to provide a common defense, not a dollar or a dime to infrastructure, just paying China, Japan, and other bondholders of U.S. Treasuries because of our massive deficit spending and debt appetite, which was $1.7 trillion, the annual deficit, last year, which is more than the entire deficit, the discretionary budget that we're fighting over, and often between my own party. So there is great concern, and yet there's a silver lining in your report. I'm anxious to hear more about it, Dr. Swagel. You mentioned that one bright spot is that the deficit spending has actually gone down year over year in the short run. It's eclipsed by the growth in mandatory and interest in the 10-year, but year over year, deficit spending goes down because Republicans decided to use basically the action-forcing mechanism and moment of the debt ceiling to bring my Democrat colleagues to the table and negotiate a spending cap deal. That FRA spending cap deal that was bipartisan, that we passed and the president signed into law, will save $1.6 trillion over 10 years. So as Moody's and Fitch mentioned in their report, as they downgraded our credit rating and our outlook, we need to do more FRA deals that reduce spending, but we need to focus on mandatory programs. And by the way, in 10 years, mandatory spending, or that spending which is on autopilot, goes from under 75% of the total budget of the United States to 80% or 79%, almost 80% of the entire budget. So we have a bipartisan fiscal commission, Dr. Swagel, that would focus on the long-term unfunded liabilities, that would address what Fitch and Moody's suggested, that we have a long-term plan, and that we have both parties at the table to address it. If we could keep doing the FRA, modest improvements on the controlling spending on discretionary and get serious about reining in this runaway spending on the mandatory side, we might save this country. We might give Jerome Powell something to be more confident and sanguine about with respect to America's fiscal future. Again, thanks for coming. We appreciate your time and insights. And with that, I yield to my ranking member for as much time as he may consume.